Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Saunders, and I am the head of membership here at the National Museum of the American Indian. Our team is very excited to welcome you today to this exclusive members-only event highlighting the museum's latest exhibition, Developing Stories, Native Photographers in the Field. More than 260 members have registered to join us today, representing 36 states, the District of Columbia, and is from as far away as Switzerland and Ireland. With us today are our museum curator, Cecile R. Gantone, and photojournalist, Russell Albert Daniels, to discuss Daniels' photo essay, The Hanizaro Pueblo of Abiquiu. This is the first essay in the Developing Stories series, which many of you will be familiar with from the 10-page spread in the most recent issue of American Indian Magazine and from the online exhibition on the museum's website. And now, please welcome Cecile Gantone and Russell Albert Daniels.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my very great pleasure to be with you this evening, and it's my honor to be with you here with Russell Albert Daniels. Russell is a very fine photographer, a socially committed photographer, and one for whom photography is an important storytelling tool for delving into the diversity and complexity of contemporary Native life. Russell, welcome. How are you doing this evening?
Thank you. I'm awesome. I'm just happy to be here, and I'm very thankful that the museum and yourself for this great collaboration we did. Everyone in Abiquiu is very happy with the story.
Oh, great. So Russell, presumably the folks that have tuned in have taken a good look at your photo essay already, and they have read your article in the museum's magazine, but I think it would be a good idea for you and I to summarize the photo essay. So let me start us off. So the essay explores the present day lives of Hanizaro peoples that live on a tract of land in northern New Mexico, and it's known as the Pueblo of Abiquiu land grant. And it's been well documented that the Hanizaro people, that their genesis lies in violence and slavery that was brought about by the intrusion of Spanish colonists into the region. And their ancestors were native peoples of various tribal backgrounds who were taken into Spanish settlements, who were baptized, who were given Spanish names and taught Spanish. And there they were forced into servitude and also to serve as militia to protect Spanish colonial settlements. Many of them, it's known, suffered physical and sexual abuse, but eventually they and their children, many fathered by the Spanish, were freed. And over time, they were able to acquire land grants from the Spanish, which they have been living on all these years. So your essay is looking at one of these Hanizaro communities, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So the Spanish law allowed the Hanizaro, the enslaved Native Americans, their freedom, usually around adulthood. And over almost 200 years, they did this, and many communities developed throughout the Rio Grande area. And none of the Spanish settlers wanted these Hanizaro, freed Hanizaros living in their communities. And there were a lot of communities starting to develop. And so the Spanish government, as an experiment, they created Hanizaro land grant communities. And at this time, New Mexico was, in the 1700s, was about a third, the population was about a third Hanizaro. And so the government created these land grant communities for the Hanizaro people, and they stuck them on the periphery of Santa Fe, Albuquerque, and Santa Cruz, some of the Spanish settlements, and some of the pueblos that were already along the Rio Grande area. And they stuck these land grant communities in these natural corridors that were trade routes, migration routes, and they stuck them there. This is the experiment. They stuck them there as a fortified and militarized pueblo, often to protect these Spanish settlements from raiding tribes from the north, from the east, from all over. And so that's when it began. 1754, Abiquiu was created. And so some of these land grant communities, they're kind of a double-edged sword. I mean, they were very dangerous. These people were militarized. They were militia, but also at the same time, it allowed these Native Americans, these Hanisaro people, to own land, have jobs, have a farm, and raise families.
And have a sense of community. Today, about how many such Hanisaro land grant communities are there in Mexico?
So there was about 12 made back in the 1700s, and about 6 remain. It's a little unclear exactly how many are around today, and how many were created, but about 6 remain.
Okay, and so we do want to get to your photos, but first, Russell, tell us what drew you to this topic. How did you learn about Hanisaro peoples?
Right. So I am Dene and Ho-Chunk. That's Navajo and Winnebago. On my father's side, we are Dene, and our great-great-grandmother, Rose, in the middle 1840s, she was taken captive by the White River band of Utes. She was in Arizona. She was watering the family sheep there along the Colorado River. This is pre-Arizona, pre-river being called Colorado. And the White River Utes came in and took her. She was about 5 years old. They then trafficked her back to Colorado. And from there, she was enslaved. She was beaten. She was young. They made her do all the hard work. And from there, she was kind of passed around in a few different Ute bands. And eventually, she was traded at Fort Bridger, Wyoming, to my great-great-grandfather, Aaron Daniels. He was one of the first Mormons in this area in Utah, which was actually Mexico at the time. The Mormons were there squatting to create their own kingdom. He purchased her because he was a polygamist and he had a couple wives and he was always out. And she was a servant for his family. Eventually, both of his wives divorced him because he was all over the place. And they sent Rose to live with him. And within a few years of that, they were married. And within a few years of that, they had children. She lived to be 103. They had 4 kids. And the Northern Ute tribe ended up adopting her and giving her a 100-acre parcel of land.
So with this family history, you were naturally drawn to the Hanisaro story because it's basically a captivity story.
Right, yeah. So I grew up with these stories. It always fascinated me. I was also complex when I went to school. I never learned about this. I never learned about Spanish imperialism. I never learned about Spanish Native American slave trade. I never learned that the Mormons were here in Utah squatting in Mexico. So I put all this together and it created a sensitivity in me that made me want to pursue this story.
Okay, well, let's start looking at your photographs and let's look at the very first one. It's a landscape of the Rio Chama Valley, and talk to us about the significance of the image in the valley and its importance in colonial times and early history.
Right. So yeah, this is the Rio Chama Valley. It's a tributary of the Rio Grande River there. It's in northern New Mexico. It's a natural corridor through the mountains. It's a river corridor. What you see there in the middle of the photograph, you see some of the outlying Abiquiu farmlands and ranches and some of the private homes. And far above that, you can't really see it, is the Abiquiu Pueblo, and it sits on top of a little mesa above the river. So what we're looking at here is the very edge of the Colorado Plateau Providence, a very huge piece of landscape throughout the Four Corners area. This is where, right before it meets a big uplift of the Rocky Mountains, the western flank of the Rocky Mountains, and in between those is the Rio Grande River. We're also looking at here, you can see on the left side, layers and layers of sandstone, which is 100 million years of inland sea activity. There's also volcanic activity all around us, ancient volcanic activity all around us. And you also see major uplift and earthquakes and fault lines in this.
Russell, this area right here becomes really the outer frontier of the Spanish Empire in the 1600s, right? But previous to that, it was a very active area because Native peoples, Apaches, Navajos, Pueblo peoples, Utes, they all forged trails through this area, didn't they?
Right. Yeah. There's evidence of people coming through here in the Ice Age. There were since the volcanic activity, there's a lot of volcanic rock. There's obsidian and chert. Some of these archaic people came for those materials. But in about 1300, some of the ancestral Puebloan people moved into this area from Chaco Canyon area, from Mesa Verde. So this area has been heavily used by ancient people and modern people. I mean, today this Highway 84 right here, it goes up, goes right into, it's about an hour to Santa Fe, and it's about a couple hours up to the Four Corners.
Right. And then though, during the Spanish colonial people, when they're there, they're using these trails that the indigenous people established for their slave trading. Is that correct?
Right. So yeah, this is where the old Spanish trail came through, and previous to that, yeah, this is where the Utes are behind us to the north, and they were coming in here, and they were raiding some of the Spanish settlements, which are, you can't really see them, but they're down in this photo. So this is it was a highly used trail by the natives, the colonial people, and still highly used today.
And photographically speaking, to be able to capture the vastness of this valley, was that something that was technically challenging to you?
Right. Technically not so much, but the challenge really was finding a point of view that where this landscape, this geography, you could see history. And this is important because I wanted this to be kind of the scene setter, and I wanted viewers to begin to start understanding who the Genízaro people were. And this landscape is deeply rooted into the Abiquiu Genízaro community.
All right, great. Well, let's start looking at who some of these people are. Let's have the next image, please. So this is an incredibly dramatic photograph, Russell. I really love it. Tell us who we're looking at and where are we?
So this is Delvin Garcia. He's lived in Abiquiu almost his whole life. His family dates back to the first families that established the Abiquiu land grant. He is a former land grant board member, and today the modern day land grant board, it's kind of they manage the use of land, from cattle to water to hunting, etc. And here we are. We're at the Santa Rosa de Lima church. We're in the remains of this 18th century church that was the first church in the area for the Spanish settlement of the same name, Santa Rosa. And so we're here. Yeah, it's been in remains since then.
So why did you want to photograph Delvin in the remains of this church?
So the Genízaro people at Abiquiu have a deep, deep connection here. This is once again, the first settlement, Spanish settlement in the area, in this northern territory of New Mexico. And this is the first church built in that area. And this is while Abiquiu is being created, the Pueblo being established, while they're building their own church there, the Genízaro people came down here. It's about a mile away from Abiquiu, and they would attend church here. It's also the first community. It's the Spanish settlement, the community, the first community that the Genízaro people were protecting, as established by the Spanish government. So yeah, Delvin wanted to be photographed here. I believe that a portrait is a collaboration between the photographer and the subject, and I thought it was a great idea.
Oh, now, what time of day are you out there? Because those shadows and the clouds are just wonderful.
Right. So we met up after he got off of work, and we met up down there, And we were just walking around. This is about right before sunset. So I think around between 7 and 8, somewhere around there PM. It's in the summer. So you also, what you see is the monsoon clouds in the background. You see a little taste of the northern New Mexico landscape there. And so we were just wandering around, looking at some different shots, different backgrounds, and all of a sudden the sun comes through at a low angle as it was setting through the monsoon clouds there, and just creates this very, very dramatic ray of light. And we were both just like, okay, right there, you're going right there, I'm gonna take these pictures. And we were both, I mean, literally we were both silent, and the emotional impact of this lighting was taking a hold of both of us. And we were both just knew we had something great going on right here.
Yeah, you certainly did capture a great image. Let's look at your next photo. Okay, I believe this gentleman is one of the elders of the Genizaro community at Abiquiu. His name is Dexter. His name is
Dexter Trujillo.
Dexter Trujillo.
Right. So here he is. Dexter is the honorary mayor of Abiquiu. He's the spiritual and cultural Genízaro leader and organizer in town. He also works with the local parish, volunteers there. Everybody knows Dexter. You can go online and see some stories about him in different articles. He's a keeper of the traditional Genízaro knowledge. He knows the songs, the prayers, the dances, and the stories. He's also, his family, the Trujillo family, is very rich in northern New Mexico, not rich in money, but rich in history and in their pride. And they're one of the first families that helped settle the Abiquiu Pueblo.
And what is he doing in this photograph? It looks like he's looking at something in his hands. What's that all about?
Right. So he was saying a prayer, and he broke from his prayer to go into this juniper tree. And he goes in, he pulls out this little piece of what they call mistletoe. It's a fungus. And he begins to tell me a story about his ancestor in the 1800s that lived in Abiquiu. He was this ancestor was a young child and was abducted right out of the Pueblo by some Apache. And he was, this ancestor spent about 9 years with this tribe, and unfortunately they left him for dead because he had an injury. And so this ancestor survived for a while eating this mistletoe. And then eventually the US Army came in and they found him and they returned him back to Abiquiu.
Amazing, amazing. Let's just look at the next photo. Okay, I believe this is what's known in English as the captive dance, and it takes place, is it during the month of November, Russell?
Right.
And
yeah.
Yeah, what's it about?
Yeah, so as they would say, the El Cautivo dance. This is one of the most celebrated ceremonial dances, and very unique to Abiquiu. It's been going on for about 150 years. This is in November. And this is the time of year when Abiquiu would have their big trade fairs from the beginning. And so the different native people, surrounding tribes would come in and trade with some of the Spanish settlers. And what's happening here is it's a reenactment of they're dressed as their ancestors, and they're acting the native captives being marched into the plaza to be sold. And as you can see, most of them are women and children, and that was the situation back then. Most of the captives this time period were women and children. And then you see the dollar bills, the $2 bills pinned to their dresses, and what that represents is the ransom that's being paid for them. And also what I think is interesting about this as well is when you look at their attire, their ceremonial dress, their regalia, and their jewelry, it represents the intertribal influences all around them, from the Pueblo to the Plains to the Navajo and the Apache. I find that pretty interesting as well.
It's fascinating. And what I like, or what I get out of looking at this photograph and all of your photographs in this photo essay of yours is that it seems to me the Hanisaro people are people who really, long ago came to terms with what was a very violent history, but they do find it important to memorialize that history.
Right. Yeah, it's a very painful history. It's something they don't want to forget. I mean, it's something that it's been written about. It's not widely known, I feel like, outside of northern New Mexico, but it's a painful history, and it's something I can relate to in a sense because of my own ancestry as well.
Well, talk to us about the composition of the photo, because it certainly is dramatic.
Right. I really like the leading line and all the faces you can see, and I like how everyone was able to get in there. And the challenging thing with this photo really is I spent 2.5 months there in Abiquiu over last year in the summer and in the fall, documenting, making this story happen. And it took all that time to develop a relationship with the community, relationship with some of these dancers. And, that relationship that I built with them allowed me the access to get really close. A lot of these Pueblo communities do not allow photography, and for good reasons. And they allowed me in because I think, I told them my story, my own personal family story. I told them about my projects, and I told them about all my research, and they really gelled with my ideas, and they allowed me and trusted me to come and tell their story.
Well, you certainly did a wonderful job.
Thank you.
David, I think we're ready to take questions from the audience.
Hey, I'm back. Okay, I'm back. Hey, thanks so much, guys. I could listen to the two of you talk about this forever. We often talk about the museum's work to share stories that have, gone untold for too long. And I think the story of the community at Abiquiu is a perfect example. So we have had some questions come in. We've got 6 questions right now from the member audience. One of them, Russell, you actually just answered. It was, how did you get permission to take the photos? But then secondly, from the same member, Tasha Overpeck, given that this story, this community is, it's relatively unknown, are there any reading materials or any books to learn more about the history of the area and this community?
Oh yeah, there's some great ones, and I really owe a lot of the knowledge that I've learned to some people that came before me, some of the scholars that have been writing about this for a couple decades now, like people like Moises Gonzalez, Enrique La Madrid, and to the Trujillo family, Isabel and Virgil. There's a great book called Hanizara Nation. It's a compilation of a bunch of different stories, history, poetry, and it's not so much about Abiquiu, but it's about the Hanizaro people throughout northern New Mexico. And that's a great book. There's also another great book by Andre Reziendez called The Other Slavery. And that book has started me actually kind of led my way to Abiquiu. It doesn't talk about Abiquiu much. He talks about the Spanish landing here in 1492 in the Americas, and then going north and ending up in New Mexico and in Utah. So those are 2 really good books.
Russell, I think it would be interesting for folks to know that you really took a preliminary trip to Abiquiu just to get to know people, for them to get to know you, but without even your camera. So you really put time into developing a rapport with folks. You didn't just go there one day and start taking pictures. You built up a rapport over a period of weeks and months, really.
Right. Yeah. I think as I've gotten older, I just realized that, things take a while to develop. And especially, when you're dealing with the sensitivity like this of some of these stories, I feel like you got to approach it in this way. And it paid off. It always pays off in this way.
And it's also, though, you took the time to find out who were the community leaders, who were the community elders, who were the community spokespeople, who were the people that, you should really be getting the nod from if you were going to be able to do it. So you took the time to find out who were the folks you should be talking to.
Yeah, I did. I've been doing research on this topic for a long time. And And if you go online, you can start seeing a lot of articles. There's not a lot, but there's a good handful of articles and academic papers out there that will kind of get you to this point. And yeah, that's what it took, is a lot of research, and then just me showing up with my smile and my dimples, and they accepted me. And I'm very thankful for that. There are some amazing people there in Albuquerque.
And the National Museum of the American Indian is too.
Yes, very much. Yeah. Another
All
question?
right. Yeah, so this one comes from Marilyn Groves. And her question is, do I understand correctly that because this area was under Spanish land grant, that these communities are not subject to the tribal laws and bureaucracy that other Native American communities are?
Correct. Yeah, their land grant communities are their own thing. They were established in the Spanish era, colonial era, honored through the transition of Mexico territory and into U.S. territory. They've been honored. Most of them, a few of them, been lost along the way, but they're a lot different than say a pueblo or a reservation.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what you just said, Russell, that these land grant communities were mapped, and they were, when the region went from being a Spanish imperial frontier to being part of Mexico, they were recognized as such. And then when the region went from Mexico hands to the hands of the United States, those land grant areas were recognized as such again.
Right. Yeah. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo recognizes these land grant communities, which means the U.S. Honors that. Honors.
David?
All right, I think we've got time for one more question, and this one may be a little loaded. So it's from anonymous attendee. I've been to the Abiquiu Ranch where Georgia O'Keeffe did some of her most famous paintings. Do you want to say anything about that connection?
Next question. I really refrain from talking about Georgia O'Keeffe. I love her work. Her art deserves a place in history and in feminism. She's not from New Mexico, and I feel like if she was here, she would say, "Don't pay attention to me." So I don't go down that path. There's enough information about her, and it's really taken Abiquiu the light off of the Hanizaro people too. So it's a little unfortunate, as much as I love her and her work.
All right.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is, again, while we love Georgia O'Keeffe's paintings, she did sort of spread this notion that the region was uninhabited, that it was this vacant landscape, and it wasn't vacant landscape. The Hanizaro were living right there.
Right. Yep. It's lots of people have been living there before she lived there. She bought an old general's home that was in the Abiquiu Pueblo, and she lived there. I mean, it's great. It's still, I mean, people know Abiquiu more for her than they know about the Hanizaro people or the native people that live in the area. So I as we talk about this for a few minutes, I try to avoid this conversation, but I knew it would be brought up eventually.
Well, that's all the time we have for questions tonight. So we do have some more questions in the queue, and we'll work to answer those when we send out the link to the video to everyone in the coming days. Thank you so much, Cecile and Russell, and thank you to all of our members who tuned in today. You know, your generosity is what makes exhibitions like this possible.
Yes.
And, you know, we're always grateful for your goodwill and support of the museum's mission, but, you know, your support of the museum is especially meaningful this year, given the difficulties that we're all facing together. Before we go, we're going to put links to the exhibition website and to the magazine article in the chat, so you can take another look at those following this talk. Again, a recording of this conversation will be available for all of you, and when we share that, we will include responses to the questions that we weren't able to answer live today. I hope you all have a wonderful evening or afternoon, depending on where you are. Please stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you at future events such as these. Thank you.